Hello, everybody. Welcome to another live AMA from Holo and Holochain. We're going to start with some intros and thank yous, get into some announcements and updates, do some FAQs, and then we're going to dive into our live Ask Me Anything. It should actually probably be Ask Us Anything because we've got quite a few of us on the call today. So I'll start with just some thank yous. We feel immense gratitude for our collaborators, contributors, supporters, community builders, partners, and app platform creators who all share the vision of a more distributed internet. There are some exciting events and discussions happening in our community. More people are learning about, writing about, etc., Holochain and Holo. Special thanks to contributors who are writing, reviewing, and or creating developer and community resources to increase engagement and awareness. We believe the key to success is in building our community, that the moments that matter most are the connections within and between our communities. We appreciate your faith in us and your desire to tell the world about the things you want to build or host on Holochain. We want to work with you all to realize the vision of an ever-expanding, community-controlled, distributed web. I want to make a special note. Someone from our core community volunteer team got into a car accident recently. Fortunately, the car took most of the damage, but it was a pretty serious accident. We wish him all the best and hope for a speedy recovery. We appreciate all the support and caretaking from our community, and we want you to know that we support you as well. So be safe out there, everyone. Some quick intros. We've got 4 of us on the call today, so these things keep expanding. I'm Matthew Schutte, the Director of Communications for Holo. Joining me today are David Atkinson, the Commercial Director for Holo, Mary Camacho, the Executive Director for Holo, and PJ Klimek, our product owner at Holo. Some quick announcements. We have some exciting events and meetups scheduled for the first quarter of 2019. In Paris on February 28th, it's today, there's a Holochain meetup. I can't speak French, so I'm not going to try to pronounce that. We will drop links for all of these in the YouTube chat. Also today, in Seattle, there's a meetup. So that's Seattle, Washington in the United States. In Sydney, Australia on March 3rd, we have Web3 Hack Sundays. In Dusseldorf on March 7th, there's a kickoff meeting for people that are interested in Holo. In New York City on March 25th, there's going to be a blockchain showcase featuring Holochain. And in Barcelona on March 27th, there's going to be a 4-hour workshop getting started with Holochain. I think there's actually a workshop like that going on that went on yesterday in Australia. If you'd like to join a meetup community, look for a city or region-specific channel on our chat channel. That's chat.holochain.org. If you find one, a city or region-specific channel, or if you don't find one, you can organize your own. We recommend starting by creating a chat channel for your city or region and announcing it on our announcements channel. We'd be happy to help connect you with other organizers and provide guidance where needed. We're basically trying to build a co-learning community amongst Holochain enthusiasts so that all of us can learn and grow better. Please email events@holo.host if you are interested in setting up a meetup community in your local area. Eric Bear will be happy to help. And with that, I think I'm about ready to hand it off to Mary for a little intro.
Hit the wrong button there. Sorry about that. Hi, everybody. Good evening. So glad to have everyone here on the live AMA Ask Us Anything today. And we're going to just start by sharing a little bit about what's going on. Today, we did a post up on our Medium, Holo Medium account. And really, it's about introducing the Holo closed alpha testnet. And I'm a little tempted, actually, just to read from the post but I'll try to summarize a little bit shorter instead, because there's a lot of really important things in there. And to start, it is really kind of getting a sense of what Holo is as distinct from Holochain. We talk about it every once in a while here, and what the closed alpha for Holo really means. This testnet is going to be an end-to-end test of distributed Holochain applications accessible via the internet on web browsers. So that right there is something that hasn't been done, actually accessing distributed applications via web browsers. That is completely what's new about Holo. And it just takes so much to make that simple thing happen. And that's what we've been working on and what we're getting ready to have everybody test right now with the testnet. It's comprised of all these different layers of hardware, of networking, applications, services, protocols. I mean, Holochain, people are familiar with. It's in a GitHub repo. You can go see when the release comes out. It's very straightforward in most ways, right? And that's something completely innovative and fantastic. With Holo, we're talking about combining all of the different repos that are in Holochain with another 30 plus, 35 plus repos that are in the Holo GitHub account. And on top of that, then there's configuration and networking layers as well. So this is not an application that's being released. This is a new internet, essentially. And that's what we're looking at testing. And this is just super important for everybody to understand, because it's going to really require us on the back end of this, on the developer side of this, on the testing side and receiving side, to have to kind of get everybody's feedback in so many different ways to make sure that the right communications are going to the right members of the team, because this is not a small development team, and it's not a small testing effort by any stretch. So I wanted to kind of start there as a context. A couple of things also just to call out about what's in it, and you can see most of this in the post that went out today. We're talking about Deep Key, which is our distributed public key infrastructure. We're talking about our Holo networking infrastructure, our Holo hosting virtual machine image. This is the OS that runs the Holo hosts, the Holo ports. The Holo hosting app itself, which is built on Holochain. The Holo services, the Holo service logs app, which is another Holochain HApp. The HApp store, the Holo HApp store, the HApp store as people call it. The Holo Fuel app, which we've been talking about on some of our posts more recently. And then we'll also be getting to the point of testing the Holo ports as those start coming off the production assembly lines. So this is a big deal. And really, it's funny because the goals are super simple. The goals are just to enable non-technical users, everyday users, people who are not on our dev team, to install the Holo hosting virtual machine image on your computer so that you can be a Holo host, and then to provide a Holo test network that can serve up those distributed apps so that people, everyday users on the internet, can access a distributed application. That's it. It's simple, and it's so not. So we're going to get started today and take a lot more of the technical questions that people have. We've actually gathered some already from questions that have come up in previous AMAs and also on some of the other channels. So we'll be trying to dig in and answer some of those, but we really want to open this up to everybody who's out there listening right now live to also give us, you know, more questions that kind of dig into what Holo is and how it works, because we have some developers available to help us answer those. And PJ, here's the product owner for Holo, is going to help kind of contextualize those, because I'm not the person that should answer all of those, and maybe David isn't either, but we're going to try to answer a lot more of those than we have in the past today, and we hope we get a lot of that supported for you, basically, to get the answers that you're looking for. All right, I think I'm done with that. If you want to take the baton back, Matthew.
There we go. It took me a couple clicks to get the mute off. All right, well, with that, we can start to dive into some of our frequently asked questions and some AMA stuff. So let's see. First one. This person from YouTube says, "Hi all, thank you for the AMAs and updates. These seem to still be focused on the goals of Holochain. When will you show us concrete accomplishments? 1, live network map of nodes. 2, working apps. 3, how to connect holoports. 4, how to monitor how much fuel is being generated by a holoport for hosting. 5, how to sign up to host apps on the test network." This is, so they tried to fit in 5 questions into one here. So in that case, I'm going to throw it to you, Mary.
Well, some of this is actually answered in the post that went out because it describes what the functions are for some of the components and the apps that are coming out with Holo closed alpha. But let me see here. Let's see if I can kind of find my way through all these questions. So, okay, the first one, the work on Holo is concrete. Much of it's in our GitHub repos. And there's, if you go up to the Holo GitHub account, I think there's 55 different repos up there. There's a ton of work that's been happening. If what you mean is when will people be able to see end users using HAPs via the internet, well, as we've just been saying, or I've been saying, that's happening with closed alpha. That's what it's set up to demonstrate. That's exactly what we want to show. And while it's closed and not everybody will have access to it, what I'm hoping we will accomplish over the next few weeks is to start showing videos of those things and let people who are not participating in the test also have some visibility into how it's going. So we'll see how that evolves, and I'm not making any promises, but we'll see what we can do there. Just some other things. Eventually, we're going to have metrics on nodes. That's probably going to be coming after closed alpha because it's a whole other set of development to be able to pull all this stuff together. But we know we want that in future test nets. And it's just there's fewer of them in this closed alpha release, but in the open alpha and of course when we get to beta, that's going to be critical. Holo is the app that we're building right now, and it really is our focus. I think I missed a couple of the other questions, but yeah, I'll stop for now, I guess.
Thanks. I think one of our support staff accidentally moved. They got aggressive on moving the question before it finished. We'll get back to that one in a moment. Next question. What is required to have a HAP, again, that's a Holochain app, on the test net? For this one, I'm going to throw that to PJ. PJ?
Cool, yeah. Hi, I'm PJ. So to be able to host the HAP on the Holo network, you obviously have to have a HAP first. And for the closed alpha, we're going to be only allowing posting the HAPs to the HAP store by the Holo devs. HAP store is the place where you would be able to find available HAPs for hosting on both Holochain network and on Holo. And then if you want to host your HAP on Holo, you also have to have the domain name, the URL address, right? Because the whole point of Holo is to connect the URL-based old, I would say, old school internet with the distributed peer-to-peer network. So you obviously need the starting point as a domain name. So you have to register your domain name. And then you would have to register this HAP on the Holo's end with the Holo hosting app. And that would create this bridge between the URL and the peer-to-peer network. It requires a small amount of technical knowledge. Basically, the hardest part will be writing a HAP, right? So architecting in a proper way so that it's fully distributed. So the code that it serves distributed purposes. And then we're also developing the front-end library that's called, we call it HClient, that would handle all communication of the browser with the network. So that would be very easy for the users, basically writing something like hclient.send or hclient.connect. So yeah, we're really trying to make things easy. And that's going to be already available in closed alpha. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, PJ. We've got another question that's fairly technical in nature, so I'm probably going to throw it back to PJ again. Why doesn't the Holochain networking team use MadeSafe's peer-to-peer networking implementation instead of quote-unquote punting to Node? PJ?
Well, we're not using any of the existing libraries for peer-to-peer network. Actually, we used libp2p for the proto version that was written in Go. But the next iteration of Holochain requires a lot of different functionalities that are not available in any of the libraries. Those are the functionalities to handle the DHT and gossip between the nodes, which means we basically have to write it ourselves, which is quite a big piece of work. So the node thing, Node.js, we're using now Node.js for prototyping. It's just much faster to develop on. And Rust is incredibly stable, but very opinionated. And it takes a while to write the code in Rust. So the development happens in Node.js for quick iteration and moving forward. And once we perfectly know what we need, then we're going to rewrite the library to Rust. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, it's really important for us to have an iterative process where we can move quickly to figure out how things need to work, and then we can refactor that in Rust where we gain some security advantages. Okay, next one. Will there be a community/ecosystem grant for small open source dev niceties like a Web3 Zeppelin truffle kind of suite, something like that? So that's some user-friendly stuff for Ethereum. They're asking if we have ways of supporting things like that, money we can give people. David, do you want to take this one?
Sure thing. So yeah, we haven't yet settled on which ways we might be able to best nurture the vibrant open source ecosystem. So at the moment, as you've been hearing, we're really heads down getting Holochain and Holo to levels of maturity where they can be put to real use. But it's in our minds, and we're actively exploring different possibilities for how we might request, celebrate, connect, or even financially support contributors, people, and projects that are outside our team. If you have any suggestions for strategies that you think we might want to consider for how to nourish this thriving ecosystem, we'd absolutely love to hear them.
Yeah, maybe I can add some here, which would be that Holochain is much lighter than any other existing solutions at the time. So for example, you won't need anything like Ganache because Holochain itself is the developing environment where you could test your programming. And then obviously things like OpenZeppelin is great. The libraries of code and the good practices in the coding, that's something that we'll definitely want to encourage in community to develop. And Web3.js, we are already developing Starting Point, which is this H client I was already talking about. But if the community could take over at some point, that would be incredible. Hopefully, we're counting on the community in the future. Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll say one other thing, which is we do want to hear from you. If you've got suggestions, there's a pinned post on Reddit that we'll share the link to. We'd love to have comments and questions and things that you think we should be paying attention to, strategies for how we can help support all of this. Please share those because we want to harvest your wisdom and be better for it. All right, next up. Prevent someone coming to Holochain founders with $1 billion offer to buy out Holochain and then shutting it off because they don't like the competition and utility that Holochain provides. So what's going to prevent Holochain from selling out if $1 billion gets put on the table? David, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So Great question. And I think if you look at the body of work that's been produced over the last 20 years by various people involved in Holochain, if you thought that a $1 billion offer would tempt people to sell out Holochain, I think it underestimating the impact that we all know and believe Holochain can have, and definitely underestimating the motivations behind the team that's working so hard to bring about this shift in human communication and social coordination into the world. But motivations notwithstanding, let's say someone was able to buy out or even corrupt the entity that's set up to support the growth of Holochain, so the Holochain Foundation. The code is all open source. So someone might be able to undermine the organization, but the idea and the code is already out in the world, and people can use, build upon, and improve it without any official organization. So much of what we're doing is setting up legal, cultural, financial structures to accelerate the growth of a healthy ecosystem, but we're very careful to set things up so that the ecosystem isn't dependent on these specific structures.
Yeah, I totally agree. Some of the folks have probably heard my history on this a little bit, and in that I lived in my car for 1.5 years, basically, to be able to do this work. We basically bent over backwards, really, to try to figure out how to launch and grow Holochain without making ourselves vulnerable to it getting steered wrong. Like, we put years of thought and effort into trying to set ourselves up most effectively for being able to really grow this thing well without also making it dependent on whatever it was that we were putting in place. So love it. Next up, Holo Network, Holo Hosting, Holo Ports. Okay, from Telegram. Question on Holo Hosting. It seems ISPs, for those who aren't into the jargon of the internet service providers, that's the folks who you pay every month to give you a connection. It seems ISPs will decrease your bandwidth if you are frequently maxing the bandwidth you're using. How will this affect a Holo host's reputation metrics? This is for consumer internet connections, while corporate leased lines have an assured bandwidth but much higher rates. So they're pointing out that, hey, if you're in the suburbs and you start hosting, maybe the ISP is going to slow you down. PJ, this is pretty technical. Do you want to take it?
Sure, yeah. The way Holo works, as probably you know, is that it consists of nodes spread all over the world, and they can be on different internet connections. They can be different nodes as well with different performance. So what Holo Network is going to be doing, we're collecting the performance statistics on each of those nodes to be able to tell whether the node is faster in ping time or better at serving large files. And all that is to ensure that that applications served on Holo are at least as good as classical internet, right? So the metrics are going to be placing hosts in different tranche levels. And the tranche level is basically, well, the first tranche will be the fastest internet connection or the best performance in certain area. And there are critical applications that require only tranche 1 services, but tranche 1 services are going to be much more expensive. So if you have an expensive commercial connection, internet connection to your host, then probably you will end up in the better paid tranche. And but it doesn't mean that you won't get any traffic ever if you have a slower connection, because you might end up in the slower tranche. And also the thing is that those tranches will be updated in certain time periods. So you might be moving between tranches depending on what your performance is at the time. And then answering to this question, this particular question, if your ISP provider close the faucet a little bit and doesn't allow for the high-speed internet connection, then you might temporarily end up in a lower tranche. But as the internet connection goes back to the full quality on your Holo port, then you probably will move up to the tranche. So it's a dynamic service. We're kind of trying to reflect the nature, like the dynamic services, dynamic equilibrium between the demand and serving capacity. So there's going to be a lot of algorithmical thinking behind it. We're not 100% sure how we're going to solve that yet. First, for now, we have a very basic model, and we're going to be improving that with time for sure. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, PJ. I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there who really appreciate that more nuanced understanding of how this stuff will work. And the other thing for me, just to point out on top of that, is these kinds of performance metrics of latency or speed are not the only ones that matter. Mary, do you want to add anything there? Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
You can talk a little bit. I mean, I think the interesting thing about this, and PJ did point to it to a certain degree, is geography and diversity. Because there are going to be different rules from all different ISPs all over the world that are doing these things with thousands of people, you know, different nodes, essentially. And so that dynamic change is going to be somewhat chaotic. It's not going to be set. And so it doesn't mean anything over the long haul for one particular node. It's going to be something that changes. And I think it was so important to really see we're going to be learning too, and this is critical because this is about how development works in the world. When you're agile, you keep getting better, you keep iterating on this. Our algorithm, this is one of those places where the changes in the algorithms can only get better with the use of the network. And so that's why it's so important moving into test nets and getting them to grow little by little, because we need to learn what we need to learn first, and then we'll learn another piece that's much larger. And as we keep widening out basically the users, the participants in these test nets, it's going to make a huge difference to our capacity for getting the right feedback and continuing to be able to make it better.
Awesome. Yeah, the one other piece that I'd love to make visible is there's diversity in terms of people's needs on the buy side, the applications that are looking to be hosted. You know, some of them may have regulatory requirements that they have their application served from a particular jurisdiction, or it may be that they're trying to make cheap backups of some kind of content, and so the speed isn't the thing that they really care about so much, right? And so there's that. The basic gist is, there's not a one-size-fits-all. Yes, latency and speed will be a part of what affects pricing, but there's going to be a market that has a lot of complexity. All right, what's next? We have another one. This is another kind of technical question. How can the domain name service system, DNS, work on a DHT? A distributed hash table, the shared storage model that Holochain makes use of, and as a result, Holo is using as well. In centralized systems, every web domain is pointed to a name server, but with Holochain, data is distributed between many nodes, and there's no one constant IP address for a Holochain app. So how's that going to work? Mary, you want to take this?
Yeah, well, I want to start it at least. This is where it's so important to remember that Holo and Holochain are not the same thing. They're different beasts. Holochain applications aren't directly accessible through the DNS system, but Holo, the web hosting service that bridges between the peer-to-peer world of Holochain and the centralized world of DNS, the name servers, the static IP addresses, is. So this is where maybe I should just hand off now. PJ, if you want to go take this into a little bit more depth, I think that might be useful so that people can kind of dig in. It's a great question.
Yeah, sure. So DNS is from the realm of centralized internet, basically, right? So domain name service, you always have a certain domain name resolution server. You have to point to your URL, and this is something that we still have to use in Holo, obviously, right? Because we're bridging from the centralized DNS-based internet to distributed one. But once you cross the bridge through Holo to the distributed network, you're already in a fully distributed realm. And the process looks a little bit like this, that you have to point. So DNS will load from a certain static IP the loader script that then goes through semi-decentralized tranche services that point you to the hosts that are able to host a certain hub for you. But once you're there, you're in a completely distributed world. And that's how the Holo works. So this is the bridge. So we're going from like a centralized bottleneck to the fully distributed network. Hope it answers the question.
Awesome. Thank you both. Next up, will you develop an application performance monitoring, application performance monitoring, an APM solution for the Holo application to make it possible to debug the applications? Debug sounds a little odd. I think what they're meaning is to know whether or not you want to serve an app, basically, because every bad developed app consumes a lot of resources. PJ, do you want to take this one as well?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. So we're going to collect the multiple different dimensions on the nodes, which is the CPU usage, memory usage, networking usage, and during the development, you will be able to see all those statistics in your hub, right? Because you're going to be running locally the instance of Holochain that will be returning all those statistics. From the perspective of the host, it doesn't really matter that much because the hosts get compensated. So if the application is written in the poor way, then obviously the hub provider will have to pay to the host more money. And it's kind of like a natural selection again, natural patterns, where the poorly developed hubs will be just very expensive to use. So probably will be less competitive comparing to well-developed apps. But from the point of view of a developer, yes, the Holochain conductor itself will be returning the statistics on the usage of a hub. And one thing to understand is that Holochain is basically a data handler, right? DHT is one big distributed database. So usually the queries to this database are not very CPU intense, which means that well, obviously there is the place for improvements, but it's mostly the front end that will be handling most of the business data. That's at least the architectural pattern that we are imagining to write the hubs. Yeah, thanks.
Awesome, thanks, PJ. I want to add a couple of things here, which is, so all this stuff, I'll actually go at it a little differently. For those of you who are familiar with the Metacurrency project, the group of us that Holochain came out of, you'll recognize that all of those signals that PJ was talking about can be thought of as currencies, right? That can enable the members of the community to better see, sculpt, and foster flows of activity. It's exactly that sort of self-steering that we're designing these interoperable currency systems to enable. If you're feeling confused by my use of the word currency here, that's okay. I'm using it in a weird way. I'm actually using it in its more traditional way. But today, people hear currency and they think money. But we think of currency as current Cs that enable us to see or make visible currents or flows of activity. the kinds of things I talked about earlier, or that actually PJ talked about earlier in terms of charts of CPU usage, memory usage, network bandwidth, hard drive storage, etc., they can all be used as reputation currencies that alter demand for use and will interact with and influence pricing for various applications. On the other end, right, so that's the hosts kind of deciding how much they want to charge to serve somebody's app. But on the other hand, on the other side, similar sets of currencies will be available to application owners that are seeking information about which hosts they want to hire to host their app to mainstream web folks. This is along the lines of some of the stuff Mary was talking about earlier. Mary and David were talking about earlier. If you want to geek out on this stuff a bit more, I'd suggest checking out a talk that our co-founders did at the New Economics Institute about 6 years ago. We'll drop the link in the chat, but you can also just Google it. Look up Art Brock and Eric Harris Braun, B-R-A-U-N, Deep Wealth. So Art Brock and Eric Harris Braun, Deep Wealth. I think there's one on YouTube and another on Vimeo. Cool. All right, next up. At what stage of testing will real Holo fuel be earned? When are we going to make some money, yo? Ooh, that's a hot one. I'm going to throw that to Mary.
This is actually a really simple one. Holo fuel doesn't exist until we get to our beta release of Holo. That is the only time it will be real fuel.
And the reason for that is very simple, because we also have to test the fuel.
So we'll be testing that stuff before we make it live, and there's real skin in the game for folks. Cool. All right. Next up, from Telegram, can someone make a Trojan or network sniffer hap or inject one into a hap that could then pose a security risk on my network? So they're basically asking about, can people get hacked through Holo, kind of, right? Like, if I start hosting, am I vulnerable to being hacked? This sounds pretty technical too. I'm gonna throw it back to you again, PJ.
Yeah, sure. Well, that obviously is our concern, right? We're gonna be encouraging people to host third-party software on their own computers. But the hap works in such a way that you have to write the code for, we call them zones, for data handling in that gets compiled to WASM. And that happens through HDK, Holochain Development Kit. That has a limited amount of functions, and it's all sandboxed. And then also the Holochain on Holoports runs in the sandbox in a very safe OS that's called the Nix OS, where each part of the system is hashed, and you can only run the applications that were first Nixified in a certain way. It's a lot of layers of security put into place. And that said, obviously, we can never be 100% sure. So this is why we are constantly performing audits and constantly looking, poking, trying to find the hole and patch it. So it's going to be an ongoing process. But the whole general idea is to sandbox the executable code and that way achieve security. Thanks.
Awesome. And this is not some new pattern that we're inventing. This whole keep things from talking to other parts of the system approach is stock standard in the computer security world. It's why you feel willing to go to a website, right? Because our browser is sandboxed from being able to access other parts of our machine in certain ways. Okay, next up. Yeah, go ahead.
On that one, I actually just want to remind people about some things. We wrote an interesting article. It's not directly related. This is a little bit more sort of a twist on security around one's own information versus somebody coming into it. But I just want to encourage everyone to check out the blog post that went out on Holochain last week, because it was a technical security post that went into great depth about how Holo is basically managing security for people's identity and those concerns. So just a plug.
We will post the link to that blog post in the chat as well. Awesome. Next up, does Holo see itself as a database layer or a layer underneath? If it is considered a database, will there eventually be common database tools like aggregation, geoquery, etc.? Mary, do you want to take this one?
Yep, certainly. So I actually love this one because, and we do write about this quite a bit, Holo is a data integrity engine. So in a way, yes, it is a form of database. It's very compatible with the concept of a graph database. And we're actually looking at making GraphQL API for interacting with Holochain apps. So yes, we are looking specifically at those questions of aggregation and geoquery, et cetera. So it's very exciting. I think what I'd like to just say about it, though, is that it's database on steroids in so many ways. This way of making it distributed and ensuring that the integrity is based on the way that those transactions are securely made between two people who are agreeing and counter-signing on transactions is such an innovative change to how people think about data and the integrity of data that I just, every time I can throw that in and remind people about that, I want to.
Maybe I can add something.
Sure.
Holochain's the content addressable storage, right? So just by definition, it's a very different breed. And it's amazing how many different new features you can squeeze out of it, of the database that's actually content addressable. Also, we're designing entire patterns of interacting with data to basically be the graph database. And we would like to have the model of data reminding the fully fledged property graph database with links, properties on nodes and links. And those two features, which is content addressability and the graph database architecture, gives a lot of possibilities that are very new to explore. But for example, indexing, etc., there will be new services that will have to be developed. And that can actually be developed as a part of the services that people can then eventually make money on to index, aggregate data, make them available for third parties. Very interesting subject. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much, both of you. Next up, Tom asks, is there some mechanism in place to support content creators / copyright? How will Holo respond to DMCA takedown requests for copyrighted content? And for folks who aren't familiar with that, that's a nuance of American legal, the legal world in terms of copyright law that says, you know, if I have a song or a video and it's on somebody's website, I can actually send a note to their internet service provider or their hosting company and basically have that removed. Mary, can you comment on that?
Yeah, there's actually a couple of different types of takedown requests, and obviously being a global network, this is going to not just exist in the US or the EU, but it's going to be something that is across many, many, many jurisdictions and touch all those different types of copyright law that is out there. So we are looking into these things. We don't have all the answers to this. I can't just say, oh yes, of course, this is what we're going to do. Would love to, but we are working with our attorneys on this one. And I also just want to point out that part of the pattern that Holochain and Holo is really enabling are ways for communities to create new solutions to these kinds of issues. And so one of the things that I'm looking forward to, and it's not necessarily something that's going to evolve quickly or or soon, but is that we come up with community solutions about how it will be solved within, and how we will self-manage for the issues that currently are considered legal or jurisdictional. So
awesome. Thank you, Mary. On deck, let's see, what else? Is there an intention of Holo to run entirely distributed, or to run as a hybrid where certain functionality runs in the cloud, a highly optimized environment? I think by the cloud, they're meaning data centers here. I'll take this one. Holo is a distributed bridge to the classic centralized web, right? It connects the peer-to-peer world of Holochain applications that we're working to create with the not so peer-to-peer world of centralized DNS systems, etc. The application user interface developer has full control of which parts of their UI exist in the Holochain world and which they would like to implement using classic methods. Like, if they wanted some part of their app to do, I don't know, some AI thing or something where a bunch of different computers need to be really close to one another and on really fast connections in order to reduce latency, they might want that stuff. They might be wanting to pay to have that in a specific center, all in the same building, etc. So yeah, there's absolutely a capacity to do hybrid solutions of any type. Holochain is a tool in the toolkit. It enables you to connect and make use of a bunch of different things on the back end. And just we had talked earlier about tranches and latency and things like that, but some types of things that people could decide they're going to pay attention to are, I actually only want these parts of my app to be turning to these specific providers. Those specific providers may all be co-located in one building. That might actually be your own machines, right? So those kinds of things are very much possible. Next up, if Holochain eventually garnered enough adoption over time, and there was no further need for hosting services, Holo, will there still be a use case for Holo Fuel? Or are there any plans for Holo Fuel under that scenario, including Holo Fuel might be backed by, if anything? Or do you see Holo being in need indefinitely? That's a really good question. I'm going to throw that one to David. We haven't heard from you.
We haven't heard from you for a while. I think in my current mindset, I would say it is a great question, but not one that I'm focusing a huge amount on, given where we are now, given what we want to do over the next few years. And also thinking about in our world, in our minds, we probably think that's a little bit closer than my mum does when she's playing around with the internet and doing her banking and her other services. But let's just say this world does happen sooner than we all think. One is there's probably a bridge in this question, and the bridge might be there may be all sorts of other types of hosting that is required on the Holochain, in the Holochain ecosystem, that we don't even know of today. And we'd say Holo Fuel, as we see it at the moment, is still the best designed currency to support those hosting businesses. And so that's one. There's probably a bridge to this no hosting world. And then when we get to a no hosting world, I think there'll be many, many, many opportunities for incentives for maintaining Holochain applications that might not even require hosting, like things like network bootstrapping, connections, message relaying, storage, all sorts of other things that we think Holo Fuel could be a good candidate for. Does anyone else with a longer time frame in mind than myself want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll say something, which is just like, this is sort of like in the 1800s or the early 20th century when the telephone was just coming into the being, or let's say the telegram was just coming into being, or electricity was just coming into being. Those kinds of things, looking out at the future and going, well, at some point, are people going to be using the telegram? Maybe things will come along later that are better. But today we don't use the telegram all that much. But that became a giant business, right? Huge wealth empires basically were built. And the world was changed significantly by that growth of that system. Is it going to persist forever? Is the stock of that company necessarily going to endure forever and be constantly, well, not necessarily, though that may evolve and become and be used for different things over time. So yeah, I look at this and go, wow, if we're completely successful and we totally transform the entire world, is there still going to be a return on my investment after that? It's kind of a silly question, right? Yeah.
Just to add to that, I would just encourage people who are very interested in this broader change discussion to go back maybe and read some of the things that are available from the founders of Holochain and Holo, because this is not the end of a vision, and there is so much more, and that is exciting. Like we are accomplishing so much just with Holochain and Holo, but the innovation goes beyond that as well. And so I'm excited for all of it, and whether it takes 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, I think that generations ahead will have a completely different experience, and part of that is we're going to have to figure out what innovation looks like in that context. So again, hard to answer, but lovely.
Awesome. All righty. Next up, this is a question directed at Mary. Mary, can you tell us more about what is in closed alpha? What the heck is it that you all have been up to over there at Holo and are looking to test in closed alpha?
Well, how about I try, and then on occasion I may toss it back over to PJ. There's a whole lot in the post that just went out today, and I really encourage everybody to read it, because functionally it's huge. And we've been talking a lot tonight about the Holo networking infrastructure, all the questions around DNS and routing, and getting from the browser to that distributed application. That's a huge part of that networking layer. But we've also got applications like DeepKey, which is the tool that is used to manage all of the different key pairs for apps along. You're going to have multiple applications that you have access to that are all different Holochain applications, and this is a coordination of those keys so that you have a continuity. So it's really critical. Some other pieces that people may have heard the words of for the first time tonight is the one that I think is really key, that should be understood, what we're doing and how we're sort of enabling this initial test. And that's the Holo hosting OS. It's the virtual machine image that is the Holoport, that makes up the Holoport with your hardware. Okay, and so what this means is that we're enabling people to basically install that OS and that image, in a very simple way. And that during that process, that's where those keys are going to get generated. That's where your identity is going to be set up and registered with the Holo network. It's the beginning of setting up nodes on the network. We've talked quite a bit about the hosting app, and that's that part where we're connecting. If you are an app publisher or app provider, and great, you can put your app up on the App Store, That's for people to use it in the Holochain distributed form. But if you want people to be able to access it from a browser, it needs to also be made available in the Holo hosting app. And that way, this is where you create that synergy, that connection between the app providers and the hosts. And they kind of identify, well, what do I want to have available on a browser? And then the hosts are saying, hey, what do I want to host on my Holoport? So that's a really important one. But then there's just so much more, and this gets into the functioning of Holo and how all the pieces work together. And we haven't talked a whole lot about it, but service logs is one of those, I don't know, maybe it's boring to some people, but really it's what makes the world go around in some ways, because it's how we understand, well, what's happening on the Holoports. It's how a Holoport rather understands what's happening on the Holoport. How much bandwidth is being used? How much processing is being used? How do I figure out how to bill somebody for the usage of my node, my device? And so this is an app that really collects all of those service logs, that allows you to generate an invoice, and gives pre-authorization for the payments, which lead us right into the Holo Fuel app, which we have written more about maybe, and we've talked about because it connects to currency and the hot and the Holo Fuel swap. So you've heard us talk a lot more about it at least at a design level. But the app is another place where it's functional code. This is where you are doing the accounting, where transactions are actually taking place, where the payments to where the app providers are compensating the Holo hosts for the hosting of their app. This is the functional aspect of the entire system that kind of makes it a currency. And so there are so many other pieces that we are not going into that are sort of under the hood, components or features or things like that. But it is a lot to test, and it's a lot for people to really get a flavor of as they are participating. So I hope that helps, kind of walk you through a little bit more.
Mary, that was awesome. Thank you. I'm sure there's a bunch of folks that are grateful to get a bit of an overview of the various parts that we're working on, because for a lot of people who aren't really in the weeds, paying attention to every blog post and every change to a GitHub repo, it's just a black box. So thank you, whoever asked that question.
And Matt, can I just jump in and say,
yeah, David.
One thing here. So some of the long-term supporters would have been referencing our green paper, where we look at what we're delivering and compare that to a whole bunch of other projects and the funds they raised and what they're delivering. And I think what Mary's answer starts to demonstrate is just how the breadth of work that is happening across Holochain. And often we have 2 or 3 projects out there that were funded 2017, 2018 that are covering just one of these portions. That even of the 8 or 9 that Mary just covered in the closed alpha. So it's an amazing shout out to all of the developers and just the breadth of work that's happening.
Awesome. All right, let's do one last question and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Hi, do you think that Holochain is the right solution for hosting enterprise applications or applications for enterprises? Is that a target for the team? David, I think you're the perfect one to take this one on as well.
Yep, sure. Thank you. Great question. Firstly, contextually, if we're building a new internet, then we're building all sorts of applications for institutions, enterprises of various sizes, community organizations. And enterprise is one that's really, really, really interesting application for us. So We see areas like distributed analytics, distributed business intelligence, and companies like banks, insurance companies, are all fascinated to be able to understand what is happening on the edge of their organizations and how do they make sense of these things. We see institutions taking a big interest in collective response to disaster scenarios and not having the tools and systems to be able to respond in the way that the world expects in 2019. And we've talked many times about supply ecosystems, governments, small business, all sorts of institutions and organizations involved in these worlds. They're just three tiny examples of where we see Holochain as being a great fit. And there's something about building an application framework for distributed applications rather than asking organizations to move onto a platform we think is a far better fit for building distributed applications, which we can talk more about another time. And a couple of shout outs. So we recently signed a partnership with Next Block Group. We've got a partnership with Morpheus Network. And these two organizations, and there'll be many more coming, are pursuing efforts to build enterprise applications or encourage enterprises to be building solutions on top of Holochain.
Awesome. Thanks for making that stuff a bit more visible, David. I know that inside the team, we do a ton of work in thinking through all of this and lining these things up, but it's not always visible to everybody on the outside. Sometimes it can't be visible because some of these things we aren't supposed to talk about until they're more mature. But yeah, thank you. And I think with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. I'm going to hand the wrap up to Mary. Mary?
Yeah, thank you. So, I want to say a couple of quick things. We're currently finishing up the final unit testing, the integration testing for this release. And I want to take an opportunity to thank so many people on the Holo team right now, because we often get up here and talk about all the wonderful efforts of our external team. And I know this isn't geared towards our internal team, but I want to make sure if they listen that they know that they're appreciated. We've got, a large team working on Holochain that have been kicking it out release after release after release on Holochain, whether it's for the dev camps, whether it's getting ready for the Holo, providing all the needs for Holo, all of that. And then, as you can imagine from what I was describing about the Holo, like what it takes to build Holo and all the different parts and pieces, we've got a wide, diverse team that has been working on Holo, and I want to thank you all and just appreciate all the things that you're contributing and doing right now to make this come to fruition. It's just amazing, and that includes the folks who are doing the writing and the documentation and the the setup in the customer support and all of it. It kind of moves through because at the end of the day, it takes the whole group internally and externally to do this. So thank you everybody for really kicking this out. I also just want to put a big thank you out to everybody who's been with us tonight, and to all our volunteers all over the place and all the folks that contribute to the effort. I think we did a little bit of this at the beginning, but to kind of keep spreading the word of Holo and Holochain, it's a pleasure. It's just so lovely to have that in the world. In the coming weeks, we're going to be talking again more and more about how Holo works, and so we are so happy to be expressing this now to you, and we will see you online next week in the next post and at the next AMA.
Thanks, everyone. In the meantime,
thank you.
Bye.